Professor Margot Gerritsen was joined by Lucy Bernholz, Lynn Kirabo, and Aslihan Dermikaya to discuss some of the challenges, opportunities, and potential strategies for dealing with ethical issues that data scientists face each and every day. This thoughtful panel discussion set the stage and set the tone for the rest of the WID Stanford Conference in 2020.
I have the pleasure of moderating this panel. This year we're playing with two different panels. And if you've been here before with WIDS, you know that we always have a panel where we discuss careers that will still take place this afternoon. But with this incredible surge in discussions around fairness and accountability and transparency and the incredible importance of these topics in data science, we thought it would be really great to really start this day and the technical talks with discussion around that, and hence this panel here. As I said, you know, as engineers and scientists and certainly data scientists and leaders, and we're all here in the audience in one of these capacities, we always have the responsibility to deliver high quality, of course, and reliable and trustworthy work. We have the responsibility to really understand what we're doing, and to understand the consequences of our labor, and to really think very carefully about fairness, accountability, and transparency. By the way, the acronym for that for a long time was FAT, FAT. And I was always so surprised at this. And we have these conferences and go, come to FAT 2020. I always think about it as faith, spelled the old-fashioned way, F-A-I-T-H-E. Where you have fairness, accountability, integrity, transparency, honesty, and equity. That's a whole mouthful, but I think it captures everything. So we need to pay attention to this, but as in everything, it doesn't always happen. There are often many pressures. There's competition, there's power, there's money, there's greed, and sloppiness also gets in the way. So we have to start paying attention. There's a recent urgency, I think, in this field because of the growing hype also around artificial intelligence and the search in data science in every particular field. And for me personally, also this growth in black box solutions that are out there that makes people just grab a black box and use it without really understanding maybe what's in that black box. And then the other thing is also, as data is growing, and Daphne pointed out, it provides tremendous opportunity. But data in itself, of course, always is biased. Humans are biased. And if you combine that with black boxes, then the outcome can be a little dodgy, to say the least. So people are going nuts about this area right now, which is in a way great for us, but we really need to think about this. So we must pay attention. And this is not virtue signaling. We cannot do that. You know, sometimes we feel that way when companies talk about ethics, and we think it's an afterthought, but we really need to start with this. Hence today, after this fantastic keynote by Daphne, starting with this. So we have three women here with us who think about these issues a lot. And I asked them to describe themselves in just a few words as an introduction, a little different than what's in your book. So the first one I want to introduce Aslihan Dermikaya here, and she's originally from Turkey. And she says, I'm a mathematician. That came first. Second was a mom. Third was a teacher. Fourth was a researcher. And fifth was a traveler. And I don't know if your husband is watching, but wife is not in this list.
Because we are all women.
Right.
No man today.
But thanks so much for coming. And I know her boss, she works for a company called Vayan, and her boss is Vishal Sika, and we are very old friends. And so a shout out to Vishal, and he's watching, and that makes her a little nervous. But don't worry, don't worry about that. The second person I want to introduce to you is Lynn Kirabo here, and she describes herself as a quirky and passionate learner who constantly engages the potential of technology both in East Africa and the United States. So thanks so much. You flew in from the East somewhere around the East, and so it's wonderful that you're here today as well. And then we have Lucy Bernholz here with us. She's a colleague here at Stanford University. And her description is also really interesting. She says, I'm a philanthropy wonk. We have to talk about this, what you mean with this. Says, my core professional question is what's public, what's private, and who decides? She says, big data has become a source of power inequity in business and in government. What do you do about that? And I love this description, Lucy, because it's the perfect opener for this panel. So what do you think? What do you do about that?
Well, I think the first of all, thank you for having me. Secondly, for a conference for women in data science, I mean, I think there's an inherent assumption in calling out the need for gatherings like this, which is that women have experienced what it's like to be on the receiving end of a power imbalance. I mean, I assume that's part of the thinking in this gathering. So that understanding that by gathering these enormous data sets of information, particularly I'm talking about information on people, you've got a bunch of information, but the people you have information on don't know you have it. There's an automatic asymmetry, but what we're seeing in the world around us right now is what happens when a few corporations create, a sort of corpus of a resource that serves as a moat to any competition, and certainly we're seeing what governments can do with this enormous resource. So I think the very first thing to do for people who are actually working with this resource all the time is to recognize that it's inherently about power.
Now, you're very active in this field, and you've worked in this for a while. What got you starting in this?
What's public, what's private, and who decides? Because you can think about data in a lot of ways. You hear it all the time talked about as an asset or a resource or whatever you want to call it. But it's actually our identity. When it's data about people, what you're talking about is my identity in a data set that I have no control over. That's a question of what's public, what's private, and who decides. When I came to Stanford in the 1990s to think about that question, and I'm trained as a historian, I had a great experience working with historians and political scientists. When I came back to Stanford in 2011, suddenly all the engineers were interested, and all the computer scientists. What happened? All the mathematicians and all the computer scientists and all the engineers. You want to talk about privacy and public and decision making? Let's have coffee. Which is a good thing. I'm glad they're interested.
We had coffee for that same reason.
Here I am.
Yeah. She is. This is what happens when you start talking to people. You're asked to come on stage. Lynn, you are. I have to call her out. She's very courageous. She's finishing up her PhD. This is a scary thing to be at the conference at an ethics panel. And so this is wonderful. So you started your PhD working in this area of what I call faith. Fairness, equity, and so on. What drove you to choose this? And also tell me, what's your biggest passion right now? I mean, it must be your PhD work.
We hope so, right? So I am actually doing a PhD in human-computer interaction. And so that's basically at the intersection of three different fields, right? So like behavioral sciences, design, and computer science. And, when we're talking about faith, like faith, the acronym, humans have to be involved, right? Because if you're building solutions for people, you need to include the people that you're building for. Because if you don't do that, then we end up having the problems that we've been having. And so one of my greatest passions is working on solutions for where I come from. I come from East Africa. I'm from Kampala, Uganda, and I hope they're awake watching. So right now, we see a lot of solutions, a lot of systems that are trained on people who don't look like us, people who don't have our experiences, people who do not have an understanding of our context. And that's a problem because the world is getting smaller and solutions are crossing the globe faster than we can think. And so when you have solutions that are not designed for you being forced upon you, or you just using them, there's like an inherent problem there, at least in my opinion. And so in answer to the question that you asked, what do we do about it? We need to first acknowledge that there's a problem. yes, we have algorithms that are working now. We have, solutions that we've built, but there is a section of the population that we did not consider when we were building. And so I think the first step is saying, yes, we have a problem, and then working on a solution together.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about your experience also in Africa, because of course, one of the interesting things for me about data science is that it doesn't really know that many borders. Right? Everybody in the world can participate in this. You don't need mineral resources, for example, as in other areas, right? You need a computer, and you need to have brain power, and brain power is everywhere. Although at the same time, we still have monopolies, right, because of data. So we'll come back to that. I'd like to ask you more about this.
Yeah. Build on that. The people who aren't included are the majority of the people in the world.
Right. Right.
That's
represent the majority of the people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Aslihan, you come in from a really interesting point of view as well, because you work for this company, Vian, and Vian was really started with accountability in mind, with robustness and reliability. Right. And we talked a little bit earlier about black boxes, right. and I think with Vian, the whole idea is actually to open up the black box and to understand a bit better what's going on. What drove you to join that company?
So my background is in mathematics, and as I know, you introduced me, but I worked for 12 years. I'm still affiliated with the University of Hartford. I'm an associate professor of mathematics. So I see things from math approach. So during my data science certificate last year at Berkeley, we learn about all these black box models, but I want to dig in and understand what is going on in terms of math. Models are working great, like we were assigned projects. I do projects, 95% accuracy, it's working great, but how is it working? Like, okay, I'm training my data set, but if I pick something from not test data, from something not familiar with the training data set, do I get really like a good result? And I made experiments also at YNI. We did experiments and we saw this robustness is so important. Because what is robustness? So if the system is not stable, like if you change your data a little bit, and if your system blows up, like gives something nonsense, then it is not robust. And this is very important, it is. So I want to be a part of like a group who can fix this by using like models that are explainable to everyone, not just the experts in like black box models like NLP, not like only 20,000 who are expert in this high tech, like any data scientist. So I want to be one of them, like who wants to take a part that will deliver to all data scientists from coming different backgrounds, from statistics, from physics, from biology, because we are dealing with data. So instead of accepting what the black models do, like here, 95% accuracy, your model is working. No, we won't accept it. We want to play with these initials, different data set. Are we going to get really the correct results? Because it may ruin people's lives. Yeah. There are like models, NLP models, which I wanted to give an example. Maybe I don't know if it's time, but yeah, sure. I want to share example. Because, like, again, from math perspective, most of you know Google Translate, right? You write, and then because I'm a native Turkish speaker, I use Google Translate from time to time. And there had been this standard example which shows the Google Translate's gender bias towards male. So, for example, in Turkish, we don't have he and she. When you write, he is a doctor, when you say in Turkish, o bir doktor, o is like it, he and she, it translates to he's a doctor. When you say o bir hemşire, it translates to she is a nurse. I don't know if you heard about this example. So there have been lots of discussions, critics. So Google Translator, like developers, they fixed this problem recently. When you write it, you get two outputs. He's a nurse, she's a nurse, he's a doctor, she's a doctor. But this is just, I know how they fix the problem. Maybe they fix the model or the data set. But we have a solution now. It doesn't make us sad to see he's a doctor. But there is also BERT, which is published in 2018. I don't know if you had any chance to play with BERT, but I did. I wanted to see if it is also gender biased. And I'm a mathematician. I studied engineering in my undergrad. So I picked some sentences. So how BERT works, you mask a word, and then you are going to see the most likely words that will fit in that sentence. So I made an experiment, and I wrote my predictions on a piece of paper. And then I looked at BERT's prediction results. And when I compared, I was amazed with these results. I want to make the experiment here to you, if you give me 10 seconds. Am I talking too much?
10 seconds is fine, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I want you to close your eyes, but be honest with me. I'm going to tell you a sentence, and then you are going to picture someone, okay? Close your eyes. Okay, picture a mathematician. Open your eyes. Okay, that gender, what's the gender of mathematician? Who? Okay, raise your hands if it's a female. Female. Okay, female. What about males? Be honest, yes. So kind of 80% males. This is what I did. I pictured a male, and when I looked at BERT results, I have the results here. It's 83% for mathematician, for male, and 17% for she. And then actually, what is worse, I added great, and then it went up to 93% for he, 7% for she, which you really
well, this is exactly what we want to change at WITS, right? A great mathematician should be a woman.
What is the solution? How can we change it? Are we gonna ask the builders of BERT to change it, or are we going to do? How can we change it?
I want to ask Lucy about this also, because when we were preparing for this ethics panel, you talked about this, and you talked about this idea that, look, there's bias everywhere, and one of the big challenges for us is to recognize it and then to know what to do about it. As engineers, we're usually not trained in that area. So my question to you is, Lucy, you talk to a lot of engineers and a lot of people working in this field. How do you even recognize it? And how do you train people or yourself to become better at recognizing bias so that you can actually address it?
So, in the engineering and data science and mathematician and STEM fields in general over the last decade and a half, maybe 2 decades or 4, there's been a big movement to like data science for good, right? First of all, personal statement, if anybody says to me blank for good, I'm out. But on these issues, and precisely to the example that was just given, if all of the women in this room, if 80% of them see a man when you say the word mathematician, that's a social bias. We've been habituated, enculturated, literature, movie, taught, parented, whatever you want. That's where that comes from. That's not coming from a data set. That's coming from the world around us. So rather than putting data science out into the blank for good, what we need actually are those social values very explicitly part of the education and training of folks working in this field. But it's got to go much beyond that. I mean, those biases get baked in really early. So I'm not going to make you all responsible for changing society, but what you need to do in order to improve the data science training, whether that's as a mathematician in an engineering school, wherever, is really engage deeply, meaningfully into Daphne talked about having interdisciplinary teams. We need these processes to be designed to help you learn to look for those biases. Assume they're there. They're there. Assume it. Start from that assumption and go looking for them. And I love the idea of actually trying to make the black box explicable. What about actually trying to put all of the brain power in this room to understanding what data science shouldn't do, where it's going to absolutely accelerate and exacerbate the existing systems. And if you know that's what's going to happen, then don't put it out there. Then don't just hope for the best, because what we're seeing is what happens when you just assume the best and not the worst.
Right, or when these sort of unintended consequences that you can have become the afterthought instead of the thought.
You're
right
more
at the
generous
start.
than I am.
Yeah,
I'm not
well,
so sure that some of what we're going on is unintended. No, I'm dead serious, but I also think there's an optimism to engineering and science. There's a wonderful enthusiasm for looking for solutions. But you have to do that in the context of recognizing that the data will be biased. Your algorithms, particularly if they're designed to accelerate learning, guess what they're going to do? Accelerate bias. I mean, there's nothing unintended in that, actually. It's working as designed.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm just trying to be a little bit more political than
Yeah,
you.
well,
but this is why I have you on the panel.
That's because you're the host and I'm the guest.
Yeah, that's right. I got to stay that. Lynn, I want to go to you because you mentioned that bias already in your introduction today, and we've talked a little bit about that too. And you talked about this wanting people to be proactive rather than reactive. So talk more about that, and what do you do yourself in your work?
Yeah, so I was just, I really agree with what you say, because one of the things that I was thinking about is, what if we turned the design process on its head? What if we started actually asking these questions that, yes, I've built the system, but what if it fails? Like, what if it misses, let's say you have a facial recognition system. You're trying to do affect recognition, right? But does that work on people with disabilities? Because I work with people with disabilities as well. Is it trained on what their facial movements are? And if not, why? Like, why didn't you think about that? And so thinking about, instead of just, let's put it out in the wild and then see what happens, turning that on its head and thinking about it from the get-go, like from the beginning of the design process. And yes, it's going to take time, but is it worth the effort to save money at the beginning and then have this epic fallout when you've released whatever it is that you're releasing? Because I guess, people will say, we don't have the cost for that. We don't have, the manpower to think about that right now, and we can't cater. I've heard this one a lot, we can't cater to everyone in the world, but it's technology. Like,
yeah, it always surprises to me when they say they can't cater to everybody, and what they mean is women, which are just about 50% of the world population.
Even though they're going to try to sell whatever it is to everybody in the world.
Well, in this case, they're actually talking about, because a lot of the times I ask people, so have you thought about how this solution will be used in developing countries, like in the global south? And they're like, no. Yeah, but why not? Well, we can't really cater to everyone's needs, and we can't really build context specific solutions. But I'm like, the majority of your population might be in the global. There are some applications that are more used in the global south. So
one of the really interesting things for me, and also really difficult, I don't know what to do about this, is we are developing, some of us anyway, here also in Silicon Valley, ideas about fairness and equity that are of course based on some metric that we design, but the metric is designed from our own perspective, with a moral framework that we have here in the West, right here in California. And the concept of fairness is extremely difficult to develop a metric for, period, but also very difficult to develop metrics that are applicable to other areas in the world where a different morality or a different moral framework, a different concept of ethics may actually be. So there's something really wrong about us here in Silicon Valley, for example, designing tools that are supposed to work everywhere in the world, because it's almost impossible.
Yeah, but then that brings back the topic that was one of the things that has been said already, is you have to have these interdisciplinary teams, but you should also think about diversity in terms of geolocation, right? So do you have people on your team who are from far places? Do you have consultants that you can reach out to? Sometimes it's just put the survey on Twitter. you know.
So I understand, yeah, and then when we talk to companies as well, and especially startups, and we ask them these questions, I understand the pressures of the marketplace,
Yeah.
right? And the people want to bring out products really fast. We're also now in a time where folks get really interested in applying data science
Yeah.
to areas where it hasn't been used before.
Yeah.
They want to be the first, and there is money to be made in that. So that brings me to accountability. One of you said, isn't it bad if you don't bear the cost up front of really thinking about it, you're going to pay for it later? Sometimes they don't. But if they do, you know, how does that come up? You know, how do we keep people accountable? So my question to you is, how do we do that? Is there room for government regulation? Is this something that can be self-regulated by the market?
No.
Is it? I knew you were going to say this.
I just thought I'd answer that. Yeah. You get a one-word answer very infrequently. But no is the answer to that one.
But you know, in Europe, they've put some extra rules on. People here are getting a little bit nervous. We have seen some bad publicity around decisions made by big companies, and people get a little bit nervous. But yet, these companies are still doing well. How do we hold people accountable for this? You want to start, Lynn?
Jump in with that.
Yeah.
The power is in this room.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, the data scientists know the algorithms. They know the limit of what they're building. And I like how in the recent past, we've seen a lot of sit-ins, we've seen a lot of walkouts, we've seen a lot of employees take a stand against what they believe is unfair use of the product that they're building. And so I think sometimes it may not be that we can approach the government. Like, I don't know how it happens here, but you know, back home, it's not popular where you can just, you know, try to inform policy. But I think as people who are building, you have the voice to say, this will not work like this because of X, Y, and Z. And we as data scientists, we as women in this field, take a stand and say, we will not build X because of this. So yeah, I believe that the power is in this room.
This is a really interesting point that you're making, and sometimes we're asked this question. Suppose that you're working as a data scientist in a firm.
Yeah.
And you see your work being used in ways that you don't like.
Yeah.
You know, what do you do about that?
Well, the recent past has shown that some companies are actually listening to their data scientists. Like, you don't want to be that person who could have said something and didn't, because it in turn affects you, your own mental health and stuff like that. But so I would just say, speak up. There is a consequence. What if you get fired? But if you get fired, maybe you don't want to be working for that company anyway.
I want to build on this because it's not any individual's problem to solve. It's a classic collective action problem.
Yeah.
For the actual trained data scientists in the room, there's going to be all the levels of the company or the government in which they're doing this work. For civil society around the corporate structures, we're seeing an explosion in organizations devoted to fairness, accountability, and AI and machine learning. In civil society, these are organizations of advocates around it. It is a collective action problem. So maybe, you know, one thing you can really hope to get out of today are some of those connections that will give you the support throughout your professional career.
Yeah.
That will also then enable you, if you do find yourself in that situation of having to actually stand up to stop a product from being shipped, or if an algorithm and a set of analyses can't be explained, maybe there's an advocacy strategy that the people in this room and the people watching could be the leaders on understanding what to do when we shouldn't go forward with certain things. And that leadership can come from this room, but you have to think about it as something that's going to take the collective. Its effects are going to be collective, and it's going to take the work of people working together, both to make a change within a company, whether to make a change with or without a government. Your East African governments and the United States government, not that different right now, in terms of reliability and doing the right thing. So that's the power of the people. That's the classic work of civil society, and that's why, you know, people want to come together and find others who share their interests. You've got a whole room full of them here, and on the I was going to say on the phone, on the camera.
On the phone. That just shows how old you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to phone a friend.
That's right. So Aslihan, you work for a company where this is actually the prime target, is to really understand what is inside these black boxes, to build software tools that are explainable in that sense. So you must have worked with quite a few companies. You see companies working with the software that you're producing. What has been your most exciting connection there that you've had with the company?
Okay, so I'm coming from academia, so this is my first company, and yeah, as I told you, this company, we are, so being a platform member, we are digging into these black box models and trying to make it explainable to data scientists who are working for enterprises, especially who are switching from different backgrounds and want to learn data science, but who didn't maybe do PhD in machine learning. So
what is the biggest barrier that you see for people to really understand?
So at the company, or like
At the company,
based on my...
yeah, the company.
So what is the difficulty?
Yeah, what do you see when people come in and you try to give them an understanding of what's happening in the software?
So our platform is not ready yet. Well, we'll be ready. Well, it's actually, I don't know, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know how much I can tell, but the intersection of all these different backgrounds is math, you know, like, so the idea is using math-based language, we can present a platform where data scientists who are coming from these different backgrounds can easily play with the initial conditions, like the training, like they can perturb the data set and see how the results change, so can check the robustness, and then the platform will have like uncertainty, which will let data scientists to see if how reliable their result is. So it will be easy instead of working on like 2,000 lines of code in TensorFlow, PyTorch, R, you know, all these languages. The platform will be easy to use, just using math. And it will not be like a very advanced math. It's just if you know how to differentiate. Okay. I mean, you won't even need to differentiate if you don't want to, but everything will be visual. So,
but math is, you know, you're really advocating, look, if you want to understand, you need to have a basic understanding of mathematics. Right. So that is one thing. So what would you say, Lucy, is an essential thing to learn when you really want to understand this field better?
I'd get past the ethics word. Ethics has become a greenwashing word. And if I asked everybody in this room what it means, we'd get everybody in this room times 2 definitions, right? Because it's about values. And it's about and you've got to articulate those values. So if you haven't experienced in your academic training or in your professional training, you've steered away from all those humanities kinds of things because it's all about soft, smushy value stuff. That's actually what you are encoding into your algorithm. And I'd back right up and go get some training in that. And I'd really actually seek opportunities within my workplace, whether that's in a company, for the government, working in civil society organizations, a very clear explication of the values that the group thinks it's working on, because there are 2 values that we as a society, as societies, are being subjected to now on a daily basis, that if you actually rank them for yourself, you probably find they're not your 1 or 2 values. They may be your own personal 10 or 11, number 10 or 11, and that's efficiency and scale. And last time I went out in nature, I looked at art, or I met with my family, I talked to my friends, I thought about, you know, the society I want to live in. Efficiency and scale really low on the list. Really low. We're talking justice, love, friendship, beauty, truth. So if you just talk, if the conversation stays at the ethics language, you're not talking about anything. You're actually absolutely talking about an empty phrase. But you've got to get to the values.
Lynn, what's your call to action, your advice?
So I would say get out of your silos because I think you've just expressed it very well. I think when we silo ourselves or when we just are surrounded by people who are like us, like we're all data scientists and we do things like this and we use these algorithms and we have these specific outputs, we end up with systems that are inherently built just for that silo, and that is not the case anymore when it comes to technology, right? Your work will be used by someone so far away from you, and you'll be amazed at how they use it. And so I would say, I'm PhD students, so if there are any students in the room, go out and look at people in other departments, talk to them. At CMU, I've seen students come together, form reading groups, and actually have discussions about what does ethics mean for you? What should ethics look like? What should fairness and accountability look like?
Right. I'm going to ask you all to tell us what your most hopeful thought is in this space. Okay, because we've spent quite a bit of time now talking about all our worries and so on. And before we do that, I just wanted to tell you we have a little bit of room for questions. So we have, here is a mic, and so please, if you have a question for the panel, signal to the mic carriers and they will get ready. And in the meantime, we'll just quickly go and hear your hopes. Because I want to end this part of the panel with something positive. So who wants to go first? You're ready, Aslihan?
Okay, so my hope is we are going to understand the models, all these black box models. So when we get good results, like 95% accuracy, we won't say, okay, it's a great model. We won't get satisfied with this result. We are going to see if the model hurts any group. We have to be sure that it's fair to any protected group. So my hope is it will be less biased, more fair, most of these, most trustworthy, and most robust.
Lynn.
So my hope is we're going to build some amazing systems because right now, AI, machine learning, data science, they all have this amazing, incredible potential for impact. But imagine the potential if we added more diversity, if we added more, got more voices involved, and we could build, things that are amazing. So that's my naive hope. Yeah.
Nothing naive about that future of. There's a lot of talk about humans in the loop in a lot of algorithmic processes and data-driven solutions. I'd encourage you all to think really about society in the loop, and that's a recurring, recursive relationship. Yeah. It starts at the beginning, goes all the way through the process, and yes, there has to be some way when something is released that there are appeals processes, due diligence, and there's recourse for action if things go wrong. But I think that the people in this room and the people on the live stream and participating in this community around the world are precisely the people to help build that.
Right, thank you. So, question from the audience. There was a mic going around. Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for sharing your thought about bias and ethics and everything. So as a data scientist, I'm very agree with a lot of things you said, and as a man, I agree, and also I disagree about different things. My first question is...
You get only one.
Yeah, okay. My only question is the problem is, I think the problem is not the data science or the model, the problem is the data sets. And you mentioned that you want the data scientists to be more aware of what they are doing, but I think the main problem is that the data science and the models and the data scientists are slaves of data sets. So what do you think about the need of creating a United Nations of data sets to be sure that the data science are not carrying the bias inside? Because the model is just a consequence of the data set.
You want to take it, Lucy?
There's no one data set for every possible algorithm. Is that what was the suggestion, that there be a donation of data to an unbiased data set? But
the question is to be sure that the people are using the data sets which are not biased. Because the more
I don't think people can
I don't
hear you
think
now
there's a
because
single
there's no
answer
mic,
to every algorithmic solution. Data sets that represent humans are going to be biased in some way or another, and if you're addressing them for different purposes, then you've got the model. I don't think there's a one-off solution.
You know, it's a comment, of course, that is often made, is that as a data scientist, whatever work we do can only be as good as the data. I think it was really, really important that we look at that data very carefully before we start using it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think also if we're not saying that the problem is the data scientists, right? We're saying that, you know, there is an inherent challenge with some of the applications that are being built right now, if I can speak, being built. And we need to, as data scientists, well, I'm not, I'm a cousin of the data scientists, but we need to, as a field, think proactively about the ways in which our applications can be misused. Let's say facial recognition works great here, but do you want that being applied in a nation where the government is, you know, doing some really sketchy stuff somewhere else, right? You may not have power over that, but you can think about how your application might impact in that situation.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing thoughts with us today. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of the day because I know many of the speakers are going to be addressing these same sort of issues. So thanks again, Lucy and Lynn and Aslihan, for joining me on stage here for this. Right.